The restraints cut into my wrists before I even opened my eyes. Cold metal, tight enough to remind me I had no control over what happened next. When my vision cleared, the first thing I saw was her face, if you could call it a face. Silver scales caught the dim light of the holding cell, and her eyes, narrow and golden, studied me the way someone studies an insect they are about to step on. "You are awake," she said. Her voice carried through a translator device clipped near her throat, flat and mechanical, but the contempt behind it needed no translation. "Good. I dislike speaking to the unconscious." I tried to sit up. The chair held me in place, some kind of magnetic lock pressing against my chest. "Where am I?" "You are aboard the Ashkari cruiser, Verathene," she said, "and you are my prisoner. My name is Caliph Vran, commander of the 2nd Talon Fleet. You would do well to remember it, human, since it may be the last name you ever hear." I felt my heart pounding, but I kept my face still. Panic never helped anyone, not in a burning building, not in a flooded mineshaft, not here. "My name is Daniel Hart. 3 hours ago I was running system diagnostics on the survey ship Wandering Light, checking oxygen recyclers with my crewmate Oliver Grant while we mapped a quiet stretch of space nobody was supposed to care about. Then the alarms went off, and the last thing I remembered was the hull groaning like it wanted to tear itself apart. "Where is my crew?" I asked. Caliph tilted her head, an oddly bird-like motion. "Alive. For now. Scattered across 3 of my holding bays. You need not concern yourself with them. Concern yourself with answering my questions." "What questions?" "Your species has been observed for 6 of your years," she said, stepping closer, her clawed fingers folding behind her back. "You are soft. You are slow. Your bodies fail from diseases we eliminated centuries ago. Your technology crawls where ours soars. And yet, oddly, my superiors insist you might be worth studying before we clear this sector for expansion. I intend to prove them wrong quickly, so we can move on to matters that actually deserve attention." There was something almost bored in the way she said it, like she had already decided the outcome before the conversation started. I had seen that look before, actually, not from an alien, but from men who thought they understood a person just by glancing at them. It rarely ended the way they expected. "You want to study me," I said. "Fine, ask your questions." "Confidence," she said, and something like amusement flickered behind her golden eyes. "Interesting. Most captives beg within the first few minutes. You have not begged once." "Would it change anything if I did?" "No," she said simply, "but it would confirm what I already believe about your kind." She circled the chair slowly, the way a predator circles something it has already caught, more out of curiosity than caution. I could hear the hum of the ship around us, distant footsteps, the faint mechanical whir of something being moved through a corridor. Wherever the Wandering Light's remains were now, I doubted they were in good shape. "Tell me," Caliph said, stopping in front of me again, "why did your vessel enter this sector? Were you scouting for a larger fleet? Mapping our supply routes? Do not insult me with a lie about simple exploration." "It was simple exploration," I said. "We're a survey crew, 6 people. We map unclaimed systems for resource potential and send the data back to research stations. We're not soldiers. We don't even carry weapons beyond a couple of mining lasers." A convenient story. It's the truth. She leaned down until her face was close to mine, close enough that I could see faint patterns etched into her scales, like natural armor plating shifting color slightly as she moved. "Do you understand what happens to species my people classify as insignificant, Daniel Hart?" I hadn't told her my name. She must have pulled it from the ship's records, or from Oliver, or from someone else on my crew. The thought made my stomach twist, but I didn't let it show. "I'm guessing nothing good," I said. "Correct," she said. "We catalog them. We take what resources we need, and if they resist, we remove the problem entirely. It is efficient. It is fair, in its own way. The universe does not owe weakness a place at the table. And you've decided we're weak." "Every measurement says so," Caliph said, straightening up again. "Your heart rate right now is elevated. which tells me you are afraid, no matter how calm your voice sounds. Your muscle density is a fraction of mine. Your lifespan is an embarrassment. Your technology, frankly, insults the idea of interstellar travel. Tell me what about that description suggests strength. I thought about it for a moment, not because I needed time to answer, but because I wanted her to actually hear what I said next. You're measuring the wrong things, I said. That made her pause. Just slightly. A small shift in her posture, like she hadn't expected pushback, only fear or silence. Explain. You're measuring muscles and heartbeats, and how long we live, I said. None of that tells you what we do when everything falls apart around us. None of that tells you what happens when a human decides something is worth fighting for. Caliph let out a short sound, something between a laugh and a scoff, translated by her device as flat static that somehow still carried mockery. Poetic, but irrelevant. Strength is strength. Numbers do not lie. Numbers don't tell the whole story either, I said. We shall see, she said, turning toward the door of the holding cell. I have 6 years of data on your kind, and every report confirms the same conclusion. Fragile, short-lived, unremarkable. I doubt one prisoner will change that, no matter how calm he pretends to be. She paused at the doorway, glancing back at me with something unreadable in her expression. Maybe curiosity, maybe simple annoyance that I hadn't broken down the way she expected. Rest while you can, Daniel Hart, she said. Tomorrow, I begin proper testing. We will see exactly what a human is made of. The door sealed shut behind her with a heavy mechanical click, and I was left alone in the dim cell, wrist still bound, heart still pounding, despite my calm voice. I thought about Oliver, about the rest of my crew somewhere on this ship, about the strange confidence in Calith's eyes when she talked about 6 years of data and fragile bodies and short lifespans. She had no idea what she was about to find out. None of them ever did. History was full of people who looked at something small and unremarkable and decided it wasn't worth worrying about, right up until the moment it changed everything they thought they knew. I didn't know yet how this would end, whether I would walk off this ship or not, but I knew one thing for certain as I sat there in the dark. Calith Vron was about to learn that her numbers were missing something important, and by the time she figured out what it was, it might already be too late for her to change her mind about us. The testing began exactly when Calith said it would. 2 guards, both taller than any human I had ever seen, escorted me from the holding cell through a corridor lined with strange blue light. Everything on the Verathene looked polished and cold, built for function rather than comfort. Nothing about it felt like it was meant to welcome anyone. They brought me into a wide chamber with restraints built into the floor and walls, along with several devices I did not recognize, humming quietly on metal tables. Calith stood at the center of the room, arms folded, watching me the way a scientist watches an experiment they already expect to fail. Sit, she said, gesturing to a chair bolted to the floor. I sat. There wasn't much choice in the matter. Today we measure your pain response, she said, without any hesitation, as if she were reading from a checklist. It is standard procedure when assessing a new species. Do not misunderstand this as cruelty. It is simply data collection. Feels like the same thing from where I'm sitting, I said. Perspective is irrelevant to results, she said, picking up a small device from the table beside her. It looked almost like a stylus, thin and metallic, with a faint red glow at the tip. This will cause discomfort, nothing permanent. I need to measure your threshold compared to known baselines from other species we have catalogued. I clenched my jaw slightly, bracing myself. Go ahead. She touched the device to my forearm. A sharp, burning sensation spread across my skin, sudden and intense, but gone within seconds. I kept my breathing steady, refusing to give her the reaction she seemed to be waiting for. She frowned, checking a small screen attached to her wrist. Your vitals spiked, but you made no sound. Did you expect me to scream? Most sentient species vocalize under that level of stimulus, she said. Either you have unusually high pain tolerance or you are suppressing a natural response. Maybe it's both, I said. Where I come from, screaming doesn't usually solve the problem. Kalith studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind her golden eyes, though I couldn't quite name what it was yet. She adjusted the device and repeated the test on a slightly higher setting. Again, the burning sensation. Again, my silence, though my hands trembled slightly against the restraints. Curious, she muttered, more to herself than to me. Is that a compliment? It is an observation, she said sharply. Do not confuse the two. She moved to the next test, this one involving a series of flashing lights and rapid questions meant to measure reaction time and cognitive processing. I answered as quickly as I could, though some of the alien symbols made little sense to me. Still, my results seemed to surprise her again, based on the way her eyebrow ridges lifted slightly each time she checked her screen. You adapt quickly, she said, faster than the baseline we recorded from your species previously. Maybe your baseline was wrong. Or maybe you are an anomaly, she said. Either way, it changes nothing about the broader assessment of your kind. I wanted to argue, but I understood something about people, and apparently, something about aliens too. You couldn't change someone's mind with a single conversation, especially when they had spent years building a belief system around being superior. So instead, I asked a question of my own. Why does it matter so much to you? I said. Whether we're strong or weak, I mean. You've already decided to take what you want from our space. Why do you need us to be worthless too? Kalith paused, the device in her hand lowering slightly. For the first time since I had woken up on this ship, she looked almost thrown off balance by a simple question. It is not personal, she said finally. It is the way of things. Stronger species claim resources from weaker ones. It has always been this way among my people, and among many others we have encountered across the stars. If your kind proves capable of resistance, it complicates matters unnecessarily. So it's easier if we're just weak, I said. Then you don't have to think about whether taking from us is right or wrong. Right and wrong are concepts for the comfortable, she said, an edge creeping into her voice. Survival does not concern itself with philosophy. Funny, I said. Where I come from, the ones who talk the most about survival being simple are usually the ones who've never had to actually survive anything. Something flickered across her expression, gone before I could read it clearly, but it was there. She set the device down and walked closer, studying my face as though searching for some crack in my composure that she had somehow missed. You speak as though you know suffering, she said. Every human does, one way or another, I said. We've buried each other in wars we didn't want. We've survived diseases that wiped out entire cities before we understood what caused them. We've lived through famines, floods, and each other's worst mistakes, and somehow we're still here, still building, still reaching for the stars, even after everything that's tried to stop us. Stories, Kalith said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. Every species claims resilience. It means nothing without proof. Maybe you haven't been watching the right moments, I said. Numbers on a screen don't show you what happens when everything falls apart. They don't show you what a person does when there's nothing left to lose. She stared at me for a long moment, something unreadable behind her golden eyes, before turning sharply and walking toward the door. Enough for today, she said. I require time to review the data. Running from the conversation? I asked, immediately regretting the challenge in my tone, though something in me needed to say it. She stopped at the doorway, not turning around. I do not run from anything, human. I simply recognize when further discussion is unproductive. The door slid shut behind her, and the guards led me back toward the holding cell. Along the way, I caught a glimpse through a reinforced window into another chamber, where I saw Oliver Grant, seated much like I had been, restrained but unharmed, his eyes meeting mine for just a moment before the guards pushed me forward. Relief and worry mixed together in my chest, but there was nothing I could do in that moment except keep moving. Back in my cell, alone again, I replayed the conversation over and over. Something about Calith's reaction when I mentioned suffering and resilience had struck a nerve, though I couldn't say exactly why. Maybe it was simply frustrating for her, a warrior confident in her species' superiority, to meet someone who refused to confirm what she already believed. Or maybe, just maybe, some small part of her was starting to wonder if her data was incomplete. I didn't have long to think about it. An hour later, alarms blared through the ship, red light flashing along the corridors outside my cell. I heard shouting in a language I didn't understand, followed by the unmistakable sound of the ship shuddering violently, like something massive had struck the hull. The cell door slid open unexpectedly, and Calith appeared in the doorway, her expression tense in a way I hadn't seen before, all traces of earlier composure replaced by something sharper, more urgent. "Move," she said. "Now." "What's happening?" "We are under attack," she said, pulling me out of the restraints with surprising speed. "Scavenger raiders, drawn by the damage from our earlier engagement with your vessel. They have breached our outer defenses." "And you're letting me out because?" "Because right now," she said, pulling me down the corridor as the ship shuddered again, "I need every functioning body I can find, and you happen to be standing in front of me." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. An alien warrior who had spent the entire day trying to prove my species was weak, now dragging me through her ship because she needed help surviving. But there was no time for irony. The corridor ahead flickered with sparks from a damaged conduit, and somewhere deeper in the ship, I heard something crash with enough force to rattle the floor beneath my feet. Whatever came next, it was clear that neither of us had much choice but to face it together. Calith pulled me through a maze of corridors, the ship groaning around us like a living creature in pain. Sparks rained down from a ruptured conduit above, and twice we had to duck under twisted metal beams that had once been part of the ceiling. Every few seconds, the whole structure shook from another impact somewhere on the outer hull. "What exactly are we running toward?" I asked, struggling to keep pace with her longer strides. "The auxiliary control room," she said. "Our main bridge has lost power. If the Skrill board this vessel, I need a secondary station to coordinate what remains of my crew." "Skrill?" "Scavengers," she said. "They travel in packs, drawn to damaged ships like predators to wounded prey. They do not build, they do not create. They only take, and they leave nothing behind when they finish." "Sounds like they'd get along great with your empire's philosophy," I said, unable to help myself. She shot me a sharp glance, but didn't argue the point, which told me more than any response could have. We turned a corner into a wider corridor, only to find it blocked by a collapsed support beam, the metal twisted and smoking. Beyond it, I could see two of her crew members pinned beneath debris, struggling weakly. Calith rushed forward, trying to lift the beam with her considerable strength, but it barely shifted. "It is too heavy," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "I need another angle." I looked around quickly, spotting a length of pipe torn loose from the wall nearby. Growing up, my father worked construction, and I had spent enough summers on job sites to understand the basic principles of leverage long before I understood anything about starships or alien empires. "Here," I said, grabbing the pipe and wedging it under the edge of the beam. "Push down on this end when I say. It'll lift the other side higher than pulling straight up." Calith stared at me for half a second, clearly surprised that I had a plan at all, before nodding and positioning herself at the end of the pipe. Together, we pushed down in unison, and the beam groaned upward just enough for her crew members to crawl free, injured but alive. "How did you know that would work?" she asked, breathing harder than before, though trying not to show it. "Basic physics," I said. "Every human learns some version of it, whether from school or just working with their hands. Sometimes the smartest solution isn't the strongest one. It's the one that uses the least effort in the right place." She said nothing, but I noticed she filed the observation away, the same way she had filed away my silence during the pain tests earlier. We helped her injured crew members toward a side corridor marked with emergency lighting, then continued moving deeper into the ship, the sound of distant explosions growing louder with every passing minute. When we finally reached the auxiliary control room, it was already occupied by 3 more of Calith's crew, frantically working at half-functioning consoles. Calith immediately took charge, barking orders in her native language, and though I understood none of it, the tone was unmistakable, the voice of someone who had commanded battles before and expected to be obeyed without hesitation. "Status," she demanded, switching back to the translated tongue for my benefit, or perhaps simply out of habit now. "Primary shields at 20%, one of her crew reported. "The Skrill have breached decks 4 through 6. They are heading toward the reactor core. If they reach the core, they will strip it for parts and leave us dead in space," Calith said, more to herself than anyone else. She turned to me, an unreadable expression crossing her face. "You claimed humans solve problems others cannot. Prove it now. Help me think of a way to stop them before they reach the core." "Why would I help you?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "Your empire attacked my ship. Your people are holding my crew prisoner. Why should I care what happens to yours?" Calith's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might simply order me removed from the room. Instead, she took a slow breath, something almost like genuine consideration, crossing her expression. "Because if the Skrill take this ship," she said, "they will kill everyone aboard, including your crew members held in the lower decks. There will be no negotiations, no captivity, only extermination. Whatever quarrel you have with me personally, your people's survival depends on this ship remaining intact for the next several hours." It wasn't the answer I expected, but it made sense, and more importantly, it was probably true. Whatever complicated feelings I had about Calith and her empire, letting an entire crew die, including my own friends, wasn't something I could live with just to make a point. "Fine," I said. "Show me the ship's layout and whatever defenses you still have online." She pulled up a holographic display, showing the ship's interior in glowing blue lines, red markers indicating breach points where the Skrill had entered. I studied it carefully, my mind working through the problem the way I approached broken systems on the wandering light, looking not at what was destroyed, but at what still functioned and how those pieces might be rearranged. "Your ventilation system," I said. "Is it still operational in the sections leading to the reactor core?" "Partially," one of her crew answered. "Why?" "Because if the Skrill are moving through those corridors, you can slow them down without direct combat," I said. "Vent the atmosphere in short controlled bursts through those sections, just enough to disorient them, then reroute your remaining security drones to funnel them into a dead end near the cargo bay instead of letting them continue straight toward the core." Calith frowned, studying the display. "That would require precise timing. If the venting sequence fails, we risk depressurizing sections still occupied by my own crew." "Then don't fail the timing," I said. "I can help calibrate it if you show me your control interface." Back home, I managed environmental systems on ships far smaller and far older than this one. Pressure regulation isn't that different, no matter whose technology built it. For a long moment, she simply looked at me, something shifting behind her golden eyes that I hadn't seen before, not contempt, not suspicion, something closer to reluctant respect. Then she stepped aside, gesturing toward the console. "Show me," she said. I moved quickly, studying the alien interface, which thankfully used a visual logic similar enough to systems I already understood. Colors indicating pressure levels, symbols marking valve locations. Within minutes, working alongside 2 of her crew members who translated unfamiliar terms for me, I mapped out a sequence of controlled pressure drops designed to slow the Skrill advance without harming anyone still trapped in nearby sections. "Ready," I said, my hands hovering over the final control. "On your order." Calith studied the display one final time, then nodded. "Execute it." I triggered the sequence, and through the ship's internal cameras displayed on a secondary screen, we watched as the Skrill Raiders, strange armored creatures moving on too many legs, suddenly staggered as the corridor around them lost pressure in short, violent bursts. Disoriented, several of them scrambled backward, exactly toward the security drones Caleth had rerouted, which opened fire the moment the creatures entered the dead end near the cargo bay. "It is working," one of her crew said, disbelief clear in their voice. Caleth watched the screen intently, her expression unreadable, before turning to look at me. "You just executed a battlefield maneuver using ventilation controls and drone positioning," she said slowly, as though trying to fit the observation into everything she thought she knew about my species. "That is not the improvisation of a soft, unremarkable creature. I told you," I said. "You were measuring the wrong things." Before she could respond, the ship shuddered again, harder this time, throwing several crew members off balance. An alarm on the console blared, and Caleth's expression hardened instantly. "They have found another route," she said. "A secondary group approaching from Deck 7, bypassing our trap entirely." "How many?" "Enough," she said grimly. "And they are close to the section where your crew is being held." My stomach dropped. Whatever complicated feelings I had about this ship, about Caleth, about the entire situation, none of it mattered compared to Oliver and the rest of my crew, sitting helpless in a holding bay while armed scavengers closed in. "Then we need to move," I said, already heading toward the door. "We have no security forces free to intercept them," Caleth said, though she was moving right alongside me. "My remaining crew are needed here to maintain the ventilation sequence and monitor the reactor." "Then it's just us," I said. She looked at me, something calculating behind her eyes, weighing the risk of trusting an untested human alongside her in direct combat against the certainty of losing more lives if she didn't act immediately. "Very well," she said finally, grabbing a weapon from a rack near the door and tossing me a smaller device, something clearly meant for stunning rather than lethal force. "Try not to get yourself killed, Daniel Hart. I would hate to lose such an interesting specimen so soon after finally beginning to understand you." "Right back at you, Commander," I said, gripping the unfamiliar weapon tightly as we ran. We moved fast through corridors lit only by emergency lighting, the sound of distant fighting growing louder with every turn. Twice, we had to duck into side passages to avoid patrols of Skrill Raiders moving through the ship, their strange clicking vocalizations echoing unsettlingly against the metal walls. Caleth moved with practiced precision, clearly trained for exactly this kind of combat, but I noticed she kept glancing at me, almost as if recalibrating her expectations with every decision I made. When we finally reached the holding bay, we found it already breached, the reinforced door torn open, sparks flying from a damaged control panel nearby. Inside, 3 Skrill Raiders stood near the cells, their attention fixed on the humans trapped within, including Oliver, who stood pressed against the back wall of his cell, doing his best to shield 2 of our other crew members behind him. "Behind you," I said quietly to Caleth, spotting a 4th Raider emerging from a side corridor she hadn't noticed. Without hesitation, she spun and fired, the stun bolt catching the creature before it could react. I raised my own weapon, aiming at the nearest Raider near the cells, my hands steadier than I expected given the circumstances. I fired, and the creature staggered, giving Oliver just enough time to grab a length of broken pipe from the floor and swing it hard against another Raider's exposed side, knocking it off balance long enough for Caleth to finish it off. The fight was chaotic, fast, and terrifying, but somehow, between Caleth's combat experience and my own improvised assistance, we managed to clear the holding bay within a few tense minutes. When the last Raider fell, silence settled over the room, broken only by heavy breathing and the distant hum of the ship's damaged systems. "Everyone all right?" I asked, moving quickly to release Oliver and the others from their cells. "We're fine," Oliver said, though his voice shook slightly, "thanks to whoever decided to show up when they did." I glanced at Caleth, who stood nearby, studying the fallen raiders with an expression I couldn't quite place. When she looked up and met my eyes, something had changed in the way she looked at me. Some quiet acknowledgement that the version of me she had expected to find on this ship no longer matched the version standing in front of her now. "You fought well," she said simply. "So did you," I said. "Guess that makes us a decent team, for a soft, unremarkable species and whatever your people call themselves." She almost smiled, though she caught herself before it fully formed. "Do not get used to the compliment, human. We still have a damaged ship and a reactor core to protect." "Then let's go protect it," I said, and together we moved back toward the auxiliary control room, my crew following close behind, all of us now bound by something neither of us had expected when this day began. The remaining hours passed in a blur of repairs and quiet exhaustion. With the Skrill raiders finally driven off the ship, the crew of the Verathene worked to stabilize the reactor core and patch the worst of the hull breaches. I found myself standing beside Caliph in the auxiliary control room long after the immediate danger had passed, watching damage reports scroll across the holographic display while my own crew rested nearby under the watchful but no longer hostile eyes of her remaining soldiers. "Your crew member," Caliph said eventually, not looking away from the screen. "The one you call Oliver. He struck a Skrill raider without hesitation, despite having no combat training. Why?" "Because they were about to hurt people he cared about," I said. "That's usually all it takes." "Even at risk to his own life?" "Especially then," I said. "That's kind of the point." She turned to look at me, arms folded, studying my face the way she had during our very first conversation. Except now, there was something different behind her eyes, something searching, rather than dismissive. "I do not understand," she admitted, and the admission itself seemed to cost her something. "My people are taught that strength comes from certainty, from calculated advantage, from never placing oneself at unnecessary risk. Yet your crew member charged an armed enemy with nothing but a broken pipe, and you yourself designed a battlefield strategy for a ship that was not your own, for a species that has done nothing but hold you prisoner. Explain this to me." I thought about it for a moment, choosing my words carefully, aware that whatever I said next might matter more than anything I had told her before. "Humans have spent our whole history losing things," I said. "Cities, families, entire generations, sometimes to wars or sickness or disasters we couldn't control. If we only acted when the odds were guaranteed in our favor, we would have given up a long time ago. So instead, we learned to act anyway, even when the odds were bad, even when it cost us something, because the alternative was accepting that some things simply couldn't be saved. We decided a long time ago that wasn't a story we wanted to tell about ourselves." "That sounds like foolishness, dressed up as virtue," Caliph said, though there was less conviction in her voice than there had been earlier. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's the only reason we're still here at all. Your species measures strength by how much risk you can avoid. Mine measures it by how much we're willing to risk for something worth protecting. Those aren't the same thing, but I'd argue mine has kept us going through worse odds than most species ever face." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting toward the viewport, where the stars stretched endlessly beyond the damaged hull of her ship. "6 years of observation," she said finally. 6 years of reports describing your species as fragile, primitive, unremarkable. Not one of those reports mentioned this. "That's because you can't measure it with the instruments you were using," I said. "You can measure heart rate and muscle density and reaction time. You can't measure why someone runs toward danger instead of away from it, not with a device, not with a chart. You have to actually watch it happen." "I have watched it happen," she said quietly. "Twice today, in fact. Once when your crew member defended people who could not defend themselves, and once when you designed a plan to save a ship full of strangers who had done nothing to earn your loyalty." "I didn't do it for your empire," I said honestly. "I did it because letting people die when I could have helped them felt worse than the risk of helping." "That distinction matters less than you think," she said. "The outcome remains the same. You chose to act, knowing the danger, expecting nothing in return. Before I could respond, one of her crew members approached with an urgent report, speaking quickly in their native tongue. Kalith's expression sharpened, and she turned to the display, pulling up a new set of readings. "What is it?" I asked. "A distress signal," she said, "from a nearby outpost, one of ours. It reports a Skrill assault as well, larger than the one we just survived. They are requesting immediate reinforcement, but our own ship remains too damaged to engage in further combat without significant risk." "How long until reinforcements could arrive from elsewhere?" "Too long," she said grimly. "The outpost will likely fall before any other Ashkari vessel reaches the sector." I studied the display for a moment, an idea forming slowly, uncertain, but worth considering. "What if it's not about engaging in combat?" I said. "What if it's about buying them time, the same way we bought this ship time earlier?" Kalith looked at me sharply. "Explain." "You said the Skrill scavenge. They don't build, they don't strategize beyond immediate opportunity," I said. "If we could create the illusion of a larger, more dangerous response than what's actually there, maybe we don't need to win a fight. Maybe we just need to convince them the fight isn't worth finishing." "A deception," she said slowly, considering it. "Exactly," I said. "Something my species has plenty of practice with, actually. We've been outmatched more times than I can count, and sometimes the only way through was making the enemy believe we were stronger than we actually were." Kalith studied me for a long moment, then turned to her crew, issuing rapid orders in her native language. Within minutes, the ship began altering its remaining sensor emissions, projecting a signature far larger and more heavily armed than the damaged vessel actually was, broadcasting toward the outpost's location as they set a course to intervene. "If this fails," she said quietly, as the ship began moving, "we risk drawing the Skrill's full attention directly toward us, with a vessel barely capable of defending itself." "I know," I said, "but if it works, that outpost survives, and maybe it proves something neither of our species has fully understood about the other yet." She looked at me, something unreadable but no longer cold behind her golden eyes. "You are gambling the lives of my crew, and your own, on a strategy built from instinct rather than certainty." "Yeah," I said, "that's usually how it works when the numbers don't favor you. You stop waiting for certainty and start trusting the people standing next to you." For a long moment, she said nothing, simply watching the stars shift as the ship adjusted course, carrying all of us toward a fight we weren't entirely prepared for, built on a plan neither of us could fully guarantee would succeed. 6 years, she murmured finally, almost to herself. 6 years of reports, and not one of them prepared me for this. "Welcome to the club, Commander," I said quietly. "None of my reports prepared me for you either." The ship pressed forward through the dark, carrying 2 species who had started the day as captor and prisoner, now bound together by something neither of them had expected, heading toward a test that would reveal far more than either side's instruments ever could. The outpost came into view slowly, a battered station hanging against the black backdrop of space, already scarred by weapons fire and surrounded by a cluster of Skrill raiding vessels, smaller and more numerous than anything we had faced on the Verathene. Even with our sensor deception broadcasting a stronger signature than we actually possessed, the reality of the situation settled heavily over the control room as we approached. "Their numbers exceed our earlier estimate," one of Kalith's crew reported, tension clear in every word. 12 vessels, possibly more hidden beyond sensor range. "And the outpost's defenses?" Kalith asked. "Failing," came the reply. "Shields at 12%. Life support beginning to fluctuate on the lower levels." I watched the display, my earlier confidence wavering slightly under the weight of the actual numbers now in front of us. A plan built on deception only worked if the enemy believed the deception long enough to retreat, and staring at 12 raiding vessels circling a dying station, I found myself wondering if I had gambled everyone's lives on something far too fragile. "They are not retreating," Kalith said, watching the Skrill formation shift on the display. "They appear to be regrouping instead, likely preparing a coordinated strike against the outpost's remaining defenses. "Our deception isn't holding," I said quietly. "No," she agreed. "It is not." For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of failure settling over everyone present. Then Caliph straightened, her expression hardening into something I recognized immediately, the same look she must have worn during countless battles before this one, the look of someone refusing to simply accept defeat. "Then we adjust the plan," she said firmly. "Daniel Hart, you said scavengers value opportunity over strategy. If deception alone will not convince them to withdraw, perhaps we make the opportunity itself too costly to pursue." "What do you mean?" "The outpost's reactor," she said, pulling up a new schematic. "If we vent a controlled plasma discharge from its core, timed correctly, it will appear as though the station is preparing to self-destruct, rather than be captured. Scavengers do not risk their own vessels for a target about to detonate. They abandon damaged prey rather than lose their own ships to it." "That's insane," I said, though I could already see the logic behind it. "If the timing is off even slightly, you could actually destroy the station." "Yes," she said. "Which is why you will help me calibrate it precisely, the same way you calibrated the ventilation sequence earlier. I trust your instincts with these systems more than I trust anyone else aboard this ship right now." There was no hesitation in her voice, no trace of the cold dismissal from our very first conversation. Somewhere between the pain tests and the Skrill attack, something had shifted permanently in the way she saw me, and standing there in that moment, I understood that whatever happened next would define not just the outcome of this battle, but the entire question she had been wrestling with since the moment we met. "Send me the outpost's reactor specifications," I said, moving to the console, "and get me a direct channel to whoever is still operating their systems. If we're doing this, I want their engineers working with me in real time, not guessing at what I'm asking for." Within minutes, a shaky voice crackled through the comm system, an outpost engineer, clearly exhausted and terrified, but willing to follow instructions. Together, working across two different systems, built by two different species, we mapped out a precise sequence designed to create the appearance of an imminent reactor breach without actually triggering one. "Ready," I said finally, my hands hovering over the final control, sweat beading despite the cold recycled air of the ship. "Commander, your call." Caliph looked at the display, then at me, something steady and certain in her golden eyes. "Execute it." I triggered the sequence, and moments later, brilliant plasma flared from the outpost's reactor vents, visible even from our position, an unmistakable and terrifying display that anyone watching would interpret as a station moments from catastrophic failure. On the sensor display, we watched as the Skrill formation broke apart in apparent confusion, vessels scattering away from the outpost rather than risk being caught in a potential explosion. "They're retreating," one of Caliph's crew reported, disbelief evident in their voice. "All 12 vessels are withdrawing from the sector." A tense silence held the room for several seconds before it finally broke into something like relief, quiet at first, then more open as the reality settled in. Caliph closed her eyes briefly, something I hadn't seen her do before turning to look at me directly. "You saved that outpost," she said. "An outpost belonging to an empire that captured your ship and held your crew prisoner." "I saved people," I said. "Whatever empire they belonged to, they didn't deserve to die today." She studied me for a long moment, and I watched something settle behind her eyes, not quite understanding yet, but something close to it, something that had been building since our very first conversation in that cold holding cell. "6 years," she said quietly. 6 years of reports told me your species was fragile, weak, beneath serious consideration. I believed those reports completely, because they matched everything I had been taught to expect from lesser species we encountered across the stars. And now? Now I have watched a human-designed battlefield strategies using ventilation systems and plasma discharges, she said. I have watched your crew member risk his life for strangers without hesitation. I have watched you extend help to the very empire holding you captive, simply because turning away from suffering was something you could not accept, regardless of who suffered. So what does that make us, in your eyes? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, considering the question carefully before answering. I do not yet have a word for it, she admitted. My people classify species by strength, by technology, by how easily they can be conquered or ignored. None of those categories fit what I have witnessed today. You are not strong in the way my people measure strength, yet you accomplish things today that many of my own warriors could not have managed. You are not weak either, not in any sense that matters. Maybe that's the point, I said. Maybe we're something your instruments were never built to measure in the first place. Kalith nodded slowly, something resolved settling into her expression. I will need to report what happened here to my superiors, she said. The full account, not the version they expect to hear. Will they believe you? Some will not, she said honestly. Some will insist this was an anomaly, a single unusual specimen rather than a true representation of your species. But I intend to argue otherwise, and I intend to recommend that any further engagement with humanity proceed with far greater caution than we have previously exercised. And my crew? I asked. What happens to us now? She turned toward the display, issuing a series of commands that I didn't fully understand, before facing me again. Your vessel sustained damage during our initial engagement, but it remains repairable. I am ordering it released, along with your crew, effective immediately. Consider it repayment for the outpost you saved today, though I suspect you would have offered the same help regardless of what I owed you in return. Relief washed through me, sharper and more immediate than I expected, though I kept my expression steady, aware that this moment mattered too much to let slip past without acknowledgement. Thank you, I said simply. Do not thank me yet, she said. This changes nothing about the larger conflict between our peoples. My empire still seeks resources across this region of space, and not everyone among my kind will share the perspective I have gained today. There will be others who see your species exactly as I once did, fragile, unremarkable, easily dismissed. Then I guess it's a good thing you'll be there to tell them otherwise, I said. Something that might have almost been a smile crossed her face, quickly suppressed but not entirely hidden. Perhaps, she said, or perhaps humanity will simply have to keep proving it, one encounter at a time, until even the most stubborn among my people can no longer deny what stands in front of them. Hours later, standing aboard the repaired Wandering Light with my full crew finally reunited, I watched through the viewport as the Verathene drifted alongside us briefly before preparing to depart. A final transmission came through, Kalith's voice steady and formal, though something warmer lingered beneath the professional tone. Daniel Hart, she said, I misjudged your species badly, and I suspect that mistake could have cost my people dearly, had circumstances unfolded differently today. I do not know what the future holds between our empires, but I will not make the mistake of underestimating humanity again. Neither will I underestimate the Ashkari, I said. Turns out we've both got more in common than either of us expected. Perhaps, she said. Safe travels, Daniel Hart. I suspect our paths may cross again before this is over. The transmission ended, and I watched the Verathene turn slowly away, its damaged hull gleaming faintly under distant starlight before it vanished into the dark beyond. Oliver stepped up beside me, glancing at the empty space where the alien ship had been. You really convinced an alien commander that humans aren't weak, he said, disbelief still lingering in his voice. How exactly did you manage that? I thought about the cold holding cell, the pain tests, the desperate scramble through a dying ship, the plasma flare that saved an entire outpost built by the very people who had captured us. I thought about Kalith's golden eyes, shifting slowly from contempt to something that finally resembled respect. I didn't convince her of anything, I said finally. I just gave her the chance to actually watch, instead of just measuring. Somewhere out among the stars, an empire that had spent 6 years believing humanity was beneath serious consideration was about to receive a report that would challenge everything it thought it understood, and whatever happened next, one thing had become undeniably clear. The universe was full of species who measured strength by numbers alone, and every single one of them was eventually going to discover, the same way Caliph Thrawn had, that some of the most important things about a person could never be measured that way at all.